So before I launch into the second chapter, I wanted to do one bonus video covering a couple of things that I missed during the main playthrough of this game, most notably regarding books. So the first actually comes from an unexpected source, and yes, thank you 999 save slots. The fact that I was able to keep saves from like all the way back at the beginning of the game, this helped me find this. So we're actually going all the way back to the prologue. And here we are in Maggie's house. So Maggie is Luke's grandmother. Here's something that I actually did not know about this game at all until I was browsing the books section of the Kiseki wiki and noticed this one. If you examine this book on the desk in this room, okay, for clarification, let me just show you where this is. So in Roland, this is the housing complex that's just to the side of the Arband bar. So that's the bar right there. In here is where Luke and Pat's families live, and in Luke's grandmother's room, you find this, a notebook sitting on top of the desk. This actually contains a book you can read. It's not required for anything, but it's still an interesting bit of world building. Anyway, I'm a bracer. I live in a small rural town, and maintaining peace in the region is what my job is all about. Today I received some job requests from a few clients, so I set off for where duty called. My first job was to milk some cows on the farm nearby. The next was to help turn over some fields. Who was anyone kidding? That kind of job was a cinch when it came to my skill with a pitchfork. For my last job of the day, I was to babysit. At first I thought watching a bunch of kids would be easy, but it turned out that I was wrong. Dead wrong. To my dismay, there were 7 whiny kids in the house. Even for a professional like myself, 7 kids are a bit much, but I am a bracer and I will do my duty. I got to work and cradled the ones who wouldn't stop crying, changed their messy diapers, broke up fights over toys, and even managed to do a ton of small jobs around my client's house, like washing the laundry, cleaning up, and taking their dog for a walk. Even when I got hungry and felt like I had no more energy to go on, I didn't forget my duty to report to the guild. If I gave up, what a loser I'd be in front of everyone. After going through all this and arriving at the guild, the other bracers in the office stared at me in amazement. That's right, you guessed it. I'm famous for being a bracer in this town. Other bracers paying attention to me like this is what I have to deal with every day. They're probably all just jealous of my superior skills. Anyway, where were we? Okay, I remember now. So I was on my way to report to the receptionist when suddenly somebody grabbed me by the collar from behind. Turning around, I realized that it was someone more scary than any monster alive. It was my dad. After thwacking me a good one on the head, he yelled so loud that anyone could hear. So you think you can just run off and play bracer every day without ever bothering to help your mother out around the house, huh? After that, my dad dragged me all the way home and then lectured me until who knows when. I didn't do anything wrong either. Seriously, what the heck? I'm a self-appointed bracer. Today I'm off again to maintain peace in the region to solve whatever problems need solving at the request of my clients. So, obviously, that's something that Luke wrote himself as kind of like a fantasized version of what he sees himself doing. Possibly in the future, possibly now. It's actually a really kind of nice detail, and it sort of captures those, I just realized, those kind of early, like, those kind of stories that young children write where they pretty much make themselves a self-insert Gary Stu. I know I actually did that quite a bit when I was a kid, so this actually is kind of interesting, and it adds a little bit more to Luke. Sadly, he never writes any more of these as far as I can tell. I really wish this was a continuing series. But, yeah, that's all for that one, but I have something else to show in the prologue, so I'm going to go ahead and load another file that I prepared earlier for this. This is back at the Bright family house. Now, I believe you can do this anytime you have access to the Bright family house. See these 3 posts here? So if you examine this third one, it says there's a standing log for staff practice. Now, no matter how many times you examine it, it will not say anything different. Unless you examine the other posts first, and then examine the third post again. And from now on, you'll always get this whenever you examine the third post. So yeah, seems like young Estelle wrote a tsundere message onto this post, which is pretty great. This is actually kind of a nice Easter egg. I only learned about this via randomly browsing this game's Steam community page. So yeah, if you've got any game that's on Steam, sometimes checking out the community page might help point out some little details you may have missed. This one obviously isn't exactly that major, but it's just a nice Easter egg. Now, for this next thing that I want to show, I want to go back to Zeiss, and I knew I would do that sooner or later. Okay, so context for that camera movement there, I'm currently playing Cold Steel 3, and in Cold Steel 3, the R1 button is the run button, but I've got the run button set to R2, so, expect me to mess that up a lot as I'm playing through SC. I should probably remap the buttons now that I think about it. But anyway, what I wanted to do is to go into the Central Factory archives. So, at this point, we should have access to pretty much every book that that we returned to the library over the course of the Temp Librarian side quests. I need to find where's here we go, here's Septium Optic Annals. I guess I'll read this one first. So I promised that I would read all these books eventually, so let's go ahead and do that. Septium Optic Annals, published by the Zeiss Central Factory. General Theory, the current state of Orbal technology research. Particulars. 1. Research pertaining to Orbal energy attributes on a quartz interface. 2. R&D the high-output Orbal guns which utilize zero-defect crystals. 3. Statistical predictions of precipitation defects due to interference field formation. 4. Relative cascade geometry and propulsion efficiency under low Orbal energy conditions. 5. Mechanical calculation acceleration through the use of Orbal energy storing cycloidal gears with a tourbillon. Yeah, the localizers must have had fun coming up with technobabble terms for these. General Theory, the current state of Orbal technology research. During these 50 years since the Orbal Revolution, the Central Factory has striven in the reform of Orbal technology by working out a number of applicable methods for its use. Currently, the research findings of this same factory have been utilized in all facets of society and have greatly contributed to the development of industry. However, on the flip side of all these remarkable achievements, the field of basic research has been disregarded as a thing of naught. What is Orbal energy, and what are the fundamental operating principles of an ordnance? Now in an age where social appraisal of technological research has become an unchallenged part of life, it leaves us to beg the question as to whether or not we should return to basics. That is interesting, the fact that ordnance have become so accepted overall, that nobody's really bothered to research the core principles behind how Orbal energy works. They just take for granted that it does. But anyway, we've already seen a few of these, Tomorrow's Cooking, and this one, Kitty Talk for Dummies. But there are a few others here that we haven't actually read yet. This, I think I'll actually say that one for last, because that's probably my favourite of these. We have here the Herb Woodpecker. And I sincerely apologise for this, but I have to do this. A bird of legend. The Herb Scenic Route is a road lined with beautiful groves of slender trees on each side of its cobbled path. A notable sight frequently appearing in ancient royal court literature, it is thought by researchers that the scenery which knights once laid eyes on was far more spectacular than that which is seen today. Sadly, those vivid colours appearing in days of yore have long since been lost. Those awe-inspiring hues of which are written in poem and song refer to the plumage of a single bird. Its name, the Herb Woodpecker. Presently, it is exceptionally rare to catch a glimpse of this brilliant azure bird. In fact, its extinction has even been suggested on more than a few occasions. In an interesting light, traditional songs sung by knights of times past make frequent mention of these birds as being a common sight. It undoubtedly seems as though there used to exist a comparably large population of these woodpeckers, in contrast with their meagre numbers in recent times. This brings us to the pivotal question of what fate exactly befell these birds over the course of the last several hundred years. A peculiar mode of life. Although the Herb Woodpecker is in fact a woodpecker, it does not peck holes in the trunks of trees, the reason being it cannot. In general, woodpeckers use their beaks to bore holes in the balls of trees for nesting, but for the Herb Woodpecker, this is an impossible task. Consequently, they figured out another way to deal with this problem. Even if they do not bore the holes themselves, there are many other nesting holes for them to choose from. That's right, they will usurp a nesting hole made by another species of woodpecker. The Herb Woodpecker, with a beak perfect for catching insects, and its clever ploy of stealing a fellow's nesting hole, was believed to have the traits that would allow it to prosper indefinitely. Invasion by an invasive species. A sudden change occurred when a new, larger species of woodpecker came to live in the forests inhabited by the Herb Woodpecker. This larger species had managed to migrate by way of boat from its distant native land. As nautical technology developed and trade began to flourish, the coming and going of marine vessels became increasingly dynamic. However, those which travelled on these boats and ships were not always human. Blending in with the various freight and cargo, these creatures from other lands managed to come ashore one after another. With the introduction of this larger species of woodpecker, these smaller species, which were once endemic to Liberl, gradually left the herb forest in search of new habitats. Life also became problematic for the Herb Woodpecker, as its nesting hole size differed greatly from the outsiders. Yet despite these drawbacks, it continued to stay in the forest. With the small outer spaces of its habitat being driven out, finding another woodpecker's nesting hole became increasingly difficult. If a nesting hole could not be found, the Herb Woodpecker, of course, could not reproduce either. Thus, chances for reproduction among its kind gradually decreased, and a long era of decline set in among them. Cleverness and their eventual downfall. The Herb Woodpecker, with its clever methodology of using the nesting holes of others, enjoyed a brief period of prosperity. However, having abandoned their ability to bore holes for themselves some millennia before, left them unable to cope with the abrupt changes in their environment. On the other hand, those other species of woodpeckers, despite having been displaced by invasive species countless times, have continued to prosper today as they have in times past. There are many things which we ourselves can learn from these tiny birds. So, if you should happen to see one of those azure rarities flying amongst the trees of the grove-bordered avenue on the herb scenic route, please remember the struggle they have been forced to endure. Yeah, that is the closest to a David Attenborough impression that I can do, but, yeah. That is interesting, though, the fact that, that species, got so complacent that it had never learned to bore its own holes in trees and was just using the holes of others and couldn't cope when other invasive species came. It's a bit of an interesting metaphor. So, there's the Herb Woodpecker, 31 Cypress Trees, which I promised that I'd do last. Okay, so, the next ones are here, Hertz's Adventure 1 and Hertz's Adventure 2. Hertz's Adventure 2 you need to find during a side quest, Hertz's Adventure 1 is present here from the beginning, so, this one's actually kind of different. This feels a little bit more like a children's story. Hertz's Adventure, Encounter with the Spectacled Genie, Part 1. Using his finger to push his slipping glasses back onto the ridge of his nose, young Hertz continued his journey. As far as he could see in every direction, the earth had been blanketed with a thick layer of white. The fine powder covering the ground in undulating lumps and clumps was actually made up of pale granules of sand, which were light and fluffy like the freshly driven snow. "Where's the river supposed to be?" came the raspy voice of a youth named Midas from behind. Midas, a skinny boy with hair the colour of tobacco leaves protruding from the butt of a hand-rolled cigarette, that's a very weird metaphor, was Hertz's most trusted friend and one who never hesitated to tag along with him on one of his impulsive adventures. "It's just a little further," young Hertz replied without turning his head to look back at his companion. The two of them had set out for the spindly river which cut directly across the centre of the parched white desert and the oasis beside it. A rest stop well known for being the last place of refuge for those travellers and their camels who were brave enough to cross the scorching dunes. Young Hertz and Midas had planned to camp there along the riverside that evening, before attempting to trek across the remainder of the barren lands the following day. "So, do you think we'll be alright?" Midas asked as he unwrapped the silver wrapper of a half-melted candy. "There's been a rumour going around about a genie appearing in these parts, and believe it or not, but some people say he'll even gobble up whole people." "Rumours are just that, rumours," replied young Hertz. "But I might consider their veracity if we ever did happen to come across a real one," he added, brushing off the idea with a chuckle. No sooner had the words left his mouth when a booming voice thundered from somewhere behind them. "Then how about you start considering that now?" Upon hearing this, young Hertz turned quickly around, his eyes searching for the source of the questioning voice. There, standing before him, was the figure of a decrepit genie, swathed in a robe of incomprehensible black, its back more bowed than the curled spine of a cat seeking its master's attention, and a pair of old spectacles perched atop the curved shape of its talon-like nose. Yet the more young Hertz looked at the genie, the more unsure he became as to whether he was staring at something resembling a shriveled old man or a ghastly old woman. Midas froze in terror as he saw the tall, robed personage not far from his side. I'm not scared," he muttered with a face whiter than the desert sand surrounding them as he noticed young Hertz's gaze fixated on the genie. "My candy just got stuck in my throat is all," he croaked out as he bumbled through a jumble of ridiculous excuses in his head. A complex smirk of wrinkles curled across the genie's cheeks, giving the illusion that something else was living below its haggard skin. "Oh my, how cruel it is to have been gobbled up whole. What a piteous fate for that sugared lump of candy in your gullet." Not seeming to mind that the spectacles had begun to slip from its nose, the genie continued to shake its head, gripped by some mad delight. "But fear not, my little drop of sweetness, for I shall avenge you by digesting the very marrow of these boys' bones, as I change them into the dust of these arid lands." The genie narrowed its turbid eyes and trundled towards Midas. In an instant, the sleeves of its robe were flung back, exposing thin, gnarled arms, which shook like a pair of long, withered branches in the wind. The genie's fingertips extended, sharp as pointed tridents, and sped towards Midas's twitching face, advancing with precision, or at least that's what it seemed like until they passed by the boy's face and stabbed futilely at the empty air. As if being slightly amazed by the failed attempt, the genie cocked its head in surprise, but soon thereafter took notice of what had been amiss. In a hurry, it brought both hands up to its ancient face and began to neatly adjust the pair of spectacles which sat crookedly on top of its bent nose. "I've had poor eyesight since I was a child too," said young Hertz to the creature as it fumbled with the glasses, "and it looks to me like yours is worse than mine." As soon as the genie took in the young boy's words, another, much larger set of furrowed wrinkles appeared on its face. "How did you know?" it asked suspiciously. The genie tweaked the position of the spectacles on the bridge of its nose before turning back to young Hertz and inquired again. "How did you know that my eyes were so bad?" Young Hertz exchanged incredulous looks with Midas, both taken aback by the genie's apparent obliviousness. However, while this was occurring, another expression had taken over the wizened face. "So that's it, huh? I see how it is." The genie went on as it raised a bony white finger and pointed at the set of glasses young Hertz was wearing. "Those are magical spectacles, aren't they?" the creature declared triumphantly. What?" said young Hertz with a confused look on his face. "Indeed they must be," the black-robed genie muttered as it cast its eyes heavenward while ignoring young Hertz's response, and once more the crone-like figure began to tremble with glee. To be continued. Don't you just hate it when you have to wait ages for the sequel? Well, your waiting on this channel will soon be over, but first we have Hertz's Adventure 2. Hertz's Adventure, Encounter with the Spectacled Genie Part 2. Those magical spectacles must be capable of seeing the true nature of anyone who stands before them. After a fitful bout of shaking from excitement, but this time making sure to check that its own spectacles were aligned, the genie gazed down resolutely at young Hertz. "There's no point in having a boy such as yourself hang on to such an invaluable item. In fact, it would be in your best interest to hand them over. Otherwise, it trailed off. But instead of elaborating on its threat, the genie simply extended its arms once more. This time, the genie picked up a boulder much larger than any normal person could lift, and young Hertz and Midas watched as the massive rock disappeared into the fiery depths of its open mouth, causing the wind to stir as it clamped down its distended jaws with incredible force. The genie gulped down the large rock as if it had been a light snack, and not a moment later, a hollow sound like something thrown into a deep well echoed in the depths of its belly. So, have I made myself clear? If you do not hand over those spectacles, it is you who will end up being my next sweet morsel. Midas looked at young Hertz with a frightful gaze. Did you see that humongous mouth of his? He's the real deal, alright. It's just like the rumors say. Yeah, but that leads us with another problem, sighed young Hertz. Without my glasses, I can't continue my travels. As young Hertz stood pondering his dilemma, another large boulder by his feet disappeared into the genie's voracious mouth, followed once again by the ominous hollow echo from beneath its sable garb. But if he eats us, then we're both done for, argued Midas as he stood shivering with fright, imagining the candy he had swallowed not minutes before. I guess you're right, concluded young Hertz, and he stepped closer to the genie. Alright, good sir, we'll give in to your demands. Being swallowed doesn't sound like much fun, he declared. And a wise choice you've made, boy, replied the genie. After taking a long look at young Hertz's face, the genie narrowed its eyes with a plethora of wrinkles crinkled about their corners. Young Hertz said nothing as he unseated the pair of glasses from his nose and obediently placed them in front of the genie. So, these are magical spectacles, the creature said with a voice quavering with excitement as it squatted down, its face drawing closer to where they lay in the sand. Impatiently, it tossed aside its own spectacles, and after blindly searching by hand for the object of its fascination through the soft, granuled sand, it picked them up and placed them snugly atop its nose. These are no less than magical spectacles indeed, it cried in a tremor of delight as it danced around, causing its robe to flutter about wildly. With these I shall have nothing to fear! And with one last deafening screech, it disappeared just as suddenly as it had arrived. The drifting echo of its voice faded, and the two boys once again stood alone on a sea of white sand. Midas scanned the area around them. It looks like he's really gone, he said, his voice weak with relief. Indeed, there was no sign as far as the eye could see of the black-robed figure. Feeling a pang of sympathy as he looked to the side of young Hertz's face, who strangely enough seemed to be amused about something, Midas began to rummage through his pocket looking for a piece of candy to offer to his friend as a token of solace over the loss of his trusty eyewear. Walking up to the other boy, Midas held the piece of candy, its silver wrapper half undone. Don't be disheartened, old friend. It's not like this is the last adventure we'll have. I think I'm gonna be just fine, replied young Hertz. His voice was subdued, but the adventurer's eyes twinkled with laughter. Then, as if harkening back to some past events, he continued his thoughts out loud. Man, that genie must have been blinder than a bat with no eyes, he said in astonishment. Midas stared at young Hertz uncomprehendingly until the other boy turned fully toward him, a grin splitting his face from ear to ear. Then Midas saw it, and a smile of his own spread across his face, for there, resting on top of his friend's nose, was something which had grown familiar to him over the years. In the end, it seemed like the poor fool managed to mistake his own glasses for mine. Young Hertz went on in a comical tone. So the ones you're wearing are... Midas asked, though the silver rims of the glasses had already confirmed it. Yep, they're the exact ones I put on this morning. With a happy air, young Hertz took the sugary treat from his friend and popped it into his mouth. However, this time, as the honeyed glaze of the candy balls they carried in their mouths melted away, both he and his friend made certain not to swallow them whole. You know, Midas said as they walked along, even if there were such a thing as magical spectacles, I don't think they'd amount to anything in his possession, because as you and I both know, he has a habit of losing them when things matter the most. The end. Something that I wonder about that is there isn't really any desert area in any of the Trails games that we've gone to so far, so maybe that's foreshadowing something for much, much later on in the series that, as of now, hasn't even been made yet. So, one more, 31 Cypress Trees. This one I find really, really interesting. 31 Cypress Trees. The good farmer Shepherd planted 5 cypress trees in his garden. The good farmer Shepherd dug the earth carefully about them. The good farmer Shepherd suffered a year of pestilence. The good farmer Sheprot watched as all of his trees withered away. The good farmer Sheprot planted another 7 cypress trees. The good farmer Sheprot dunged the earth about them even more. The good farmer Sheprot suffered a year of bitter winter. The good farmer Sheprot watched as all of his trees snapped in the biting cold. The good farmer Sheprot planted still another 9 cypress trees. The good farmer Sheprot dunged the earth about them furthermore. The good farmer Sheprot saw his trees grow into a great canopy. The good farmer Sheprot watched as all of his trees broke under the weight of a great snow. The good farmer Sheprot planted yet another 11 cypress trees. The good farmer Sheprot plucked those which were frail and cast them into the fire. The good farmer Sheprot suffered another year of pestilence and great winter. The good farmer Sheprot watched as his last tree grew into a magnificent fir. The good farmer Sheprot, in order to confect a single grand cypress, the good farmer Sheprot planted 32 cypress trees. The good farmer Sheprot, with his loving goodness for them all, the good farmer Sheprot brought 31 cypress trees to the depths of ruination. So when I first read that, I thought it was going to be a story about never giving up and always persevering no matter the odds. But really, it's actually a story about, at least as far as I interpret it, sunk cost fallacy. The fact that he ended up sacrificing so much just to get one tree and kept at it no matter how many trees he lost in the process, and you're just left to wonder in the end, was it all really worth it? So those are the books in the Zeiss Central Factory, and I believe that's all I wanted to cover in this part. So I hope you've enjoyed this brief bonus episode of Trails in the Sky FC, and I'll see you for the second chapter.